Welcome everyone to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification class, Teacher Certification class. Be seated, please. Those of you that are coming in, please find your seats and take your time. That way we can get started here. But go ahead and be turning over to, we're going to be starting Chapter 2. We'll be on LP2A. LP2A, and the chapter title is The Effects of Character Within the Family. And as we go through this, of course, we'll rehearse a little bit from the first chapter, but it's very important to always remember the words developing, molding, guiding, all of these words meaning the same thing where we're creating something, we're building something. And remember what we said in the beginning, that we're either building or tearing down. It's never just there. It's either increasing or it's decreasing. And we're talking about tonight, beginning to talk about tonight, one of the most, if not the most important aspect of our lives, which is family lives. And families can be very large, and families can be fairly small. And then you have families within families within families. And this morning, it was interesting, as I was driving to work, I heard a report, it was on NPR News, that the majority of houses that have 3 generations or more are starting to grow enormously in the United States, meaning that you have grandfathers, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, and then mom, dad, and then children. But due to the COVID and the stress that is being put on budgets, people are moving in more and more together. Well, that creates, as you can imagine, no matter how much love, as they say, a family could have for each other, you can kind of rub each other the wrong way when you're put into close quarters. And they were speaking of a family of 8 that used to live in a 3,000 square foot house that now lives with 4 others in a 1,500 square foot house. And you can imagine, reduce the space and add more people, well, that adds to stress. But there's things that can get us through this. But we're going to concentrate on the family in general. In other words, these governing ships that will create an environment for a family to nurture and grow in building positive character. So if everyone's on LP2A, we'll go ahead and get started here with the effects of character within the family. And of course, remember, we always have the note to the teacher. And this note to the teacher, remember, once again, this is a gray tabbed page, so the students do not have this page. So it's important for the teacher to read over this page, let this sink into the mind of a teacher as we're training to be here. And this is what we will have to put verbally through guidance-ship and speaking into the minds of our students. Once again, if we don't tell them everything we're getting ready to discuss on this page will be completely left out. So it's extremely important that we as teachers read these things and allow them to be within our minds in teaching this program. But it starts off with the role of the family is paramount to our self-concept and how we interact with others. Now I want to show you, and you can write this word paramount. I'm going to put it up on the screen, the definition for it. It's important to understand what's being said with that. The word paramount, if you could zoom in just a little bit on that. Of course, it means superior to all others, supreme, a matter of paramount importance, giving us an example there, but it's superior to all others. It's something that's extremely important. So the role of the family is extremely important. And of course, that self-concept, that's how we see ourselves. That's how we look at ourselves. So the role of the family is extremely important to how we look at ourselves and to how we will interact with others. So please keep that in mind and underline that, because that's something that we need to have stressed in our own minds as teachers, getting this across. And the reason this can be a very difficult chapter to teach, keep in mind that you're teaching about the family, but rarely do you get the whole family where you can teach the whole family. You're getting a father, a son, a mother, a daughter. As a teacher, you're usually getting students. So it's not like you have the whole family sitting here listening to your class. So as you're telling the student this, and it can be whether it's a grown adult or whether it's a child, you're putting something into the mind, hoping that they can take this and be an example to others. So once again, it plays an important role in the developing the self-concept of how we interact with others. Therefore, this second chapter focuses on the family as one of the most important contributors to the development of character. Now, to the development of character, that's character, remember, how we're molded. Hold your place there. Look back over to page 13. And it always helps to write these things on your book, if you don't have it written down, to put these notes in your book so you can go back and remember what exactly is being said right here. Because you don't see the word values, but that was one of the most important things we read in chapter 1 that actually helps to shape the character of values. And if you look over to page 13, and the very bottom of the page, we're going to read both paragraphs there. And it says, having morals is an important way to define your character. Remember, morals are rules. Those are the rules that govern us and keep us safe, and they also govern families. Then remember, moral values set boundaries to help you demonstrate appropriate behavior toward others. So moral values, that's how important we believe, or we teach, or we show that these rules are. If we have no value in rules, then we ignore them and break them. If rules are valuable to us, then we go above and beyond to adhere to those rules. So it says here, in other words, a person that has moral values, he tries to distinguish between right and wrong and makes choices that are respectful and thoughtful of others according to his ability. And of course, according to his education, what he's been taught. Remember what we said from the beginning, responsibility, honesty, compassion. No one's born with these things. They have to be taught these things. If a person's never been taught, we can't expect sound moral decisions to be made. And remember even what the author said in the preface of the book, that the statements that he heard as a child still govern his decision making today. And today he's a man in his 80s that still allow these things to govern his decision making. So continuing on here on page 13, it says your character is a combination of moral values, so those are rules and how much we value them, that you are being taught, as well as values that include work ethics, education, hobbies, and so on. In addition to values, your interaction with others and their influences has also helped to notice, mold, and shape. And we're speaking about family. And remember what we said from the beginning, parents are the first teachers in a person's life, or guardians are the first teachers, and we're helping to mold and shape your character, making you notice into the person you are today. And remember what we said in the beginning there, and it's in the very beginning of the book with teachers around the world, that parents and then teachers in the schools are the first teachers that a child will interact with. Well, going back over to LP2A, and remember that development of character, it's a molding, a teaching, an educating, putting into the mind so a decision can be made. Information that's put into the mind. Think of it as a recipe. And if you're wanting to taste something in a recipe, you have to put it in. But if you don't put it in, you cannot expect to have that taste of that one certain thing you want in that recipe. And that's what we want to get into the minds of students who are going to be parents one day. They're going to be leaders. That's what they're training to do, whether they lead 1, 10, or 1,000. But we want to get these things in their mind, and we'll get to that point very shortly of why it's so important to concentrate on the students we have. You can't control what lives they go home to, but you can control what they will become, the shaping and the molding of their decisions. And when I say control, I mean controlling the words that are mentioned within their presence, the education that you're offering them. Continuing on here on LP2A, though, it says, sadly, we live in a society where children are routinely abused in a variety of ways. Now, keeping that in mind, I want to read something to you from the World Health Organization, and you can go on their website. You can type in statistics on child abuse plus World Health Organization. You can get these same statistics. But it says nearly 3 in 4 children, or 3 million children ages 2 to 4 years, regularly suffer physical punishment and or psychological violence at the hands of parents or caregivers. That's 300 million children. It says 1 in 5 women and 1 in 13 men report having been sexually abused as a child aged 0 to 17. So from the time they were an infant to 17 years old, you see a vast 1 in 5 women is an enormous amount to fall victim to that. 1 in 13 men is an enormous amount. And keep in mind the word reported. How many cases go unreported? It says 120 million girls and young men under 20 years of age have engaged and suffered in some form of forced, and we'll say improper contact. Forced improper contact. So this is not done by choice. This is done by force. This is against their will. Things that they would have not chosen to do. And I'm going to leave it right there, but you can go on and read the rest of them. You want to make sure when you're reading them, watch where your children are at, because it goes into detail, graphic detail on some of them, of what's going on in a child's life. But I want to show you something else, this abuse we're talking about. And I want you to notice this definition of abuse from the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary. Think about where we're at today, where we're at as far as time frame today. And you can zoom in a little bit. Of course, we have abuse, used as a noun. And notice the definitions. The first one is a corrupt practice or custom. So if you have a corrupt practice or custom, and this can be defined in different governmental systems, different countries. Different countries have different customs. Different families have different customs. You can even say, when you're teaching a group of people, not that you're teaching religion, but different religions have different customs. And that's what you're teaching in your classroom. And you as a teacher must be aware you're not teaching religion, nor can we as the Peaceful Solution. We teach character education, but your students have one. And a lot of their decision making will be based off of that. So think about this as you're trying to intermix with your students who you have no idea what faith they may be. But it says improper or excess use of treatment, such as drug abuse, language that condemns, vilifies, usually unjustly, intemperately, and angrily verbal abuse. And of course, verbal abuse we'll get into is one of the most common abuses that is seen in a family's atmosphere. Yelling, screaming, cursing, it can get really bad. Then it says physical maltreatment. Maltreatment of children. You have abuse here. And then notice the fifth one here, a deceitful act. A deceitful act. Now we'll just keep that in mind as we move forward. Deceitful acts, lying. But one thing I want you to notice that is not in there, that I want you to put in your book if you don't have it, is if you don't educate your child about the dangers in life, is that not deceit? Child abuse, one of the greatest forms of child abuse we see in society today is the lack of education, the lack of warning, the lack of telling someone, if you put your hand on that stove, you'll get burnt. Well, there's more than a stove out there that brings forth danger. So when we have that abuse, write in that word, the sentence, lack of education. And as you're writing, I'm going to go back and reread that second to the last sentence in the first paragraph. And it says, what is certain, however, is that abuse in any form, whether reported or not, has adverse effects on the growth and development, notice the shaping, the molding of a mind, of children that can last a lifetime. So the things that take place, and imagine something taking place forcefully, as we just read in one of the definitions in what the World Health Organization referred to as forceful acts. Imagine things that matter of minutes in a child's life, but destroys the concept, the trust, and even the self-concept of themselves, of what society should be doing and what society should be offering, to the point they don't know what to do from that point. The people they trust, the people who they put their life into their hands, imagine when someone abuses them. Now, I want you to also keep this in mind because this is very important. You'll hear it said, and on social media, you'll see it many, many times. Well, a man or a woman that abuses a child should be beat, this, that. You can put anything in there, but really harsh. But that's not the answer. And I want you to think about as we go through this, if a person hurts a child, is putting someone in prison for 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, is that the answer? Does that fix the problem that took place? So think about that as we go forward, because that lack of education did not start with the young child that was abused. Keep that in mind. Well, continuing on here, the second paragraph, it says, the second chapter takes a unique approach to character development. That's that molding once again, in that it not only teaches about the impact of family in the development of character or the molding of character, but it also informs students about the difference between a dysfunctional and a healthy family. So a dysfunctional and a healthy family. And we will get into what does dysfunctional mean. In fact, if you want to, we'll go ahead and turn over to the Have It in Our Minds. It should be on page 169 in our glossary. 169 in the glossary of your book. And dysfunctional is the second to the last word from the bottom of the page there on 169, and it says abnormal or impaired functioning. In other words, it's something that's not functioning properly. There's something that's not working. It's like having your car and the check engine light comes on. Well, it still drives down the road, but the check engine light lets you know there's something wrong in here that's going to eventually cause it to break down. It might seem like it's running fine right now, and it's going down the road okay, but there's a problem. And if you don't address it, it's going to get worse. Well, that's the same way in a family life. If there's problems, there's a theory out there that if you ignore it, it'll go away. You know, sometimes children can recall what their parents have taught them, and through the words that have been mentioned in their hearing, they can see that what I'm doing is wrong and my parents are right. I can see where I'm going wrong right here, and they'll stop. That's true. But if the education is never offered to the child, they don't have that sound background or that foundational part to reason that what I'm doing is wrong. It has to be mentioned in their hearing, and that's that forming and shaping. But continuing on here, notice it says, without giving them the power. And always remember, in the peaceful solution, knowledge is power, and power is knowledge. So without this knowledge, they are more likely to repeat the same abuse to their children, and when they become parents. Let me reread that one more time, going up to the sentence before that to put it all together. It says, because so many children have been traumatized. In fact, let me go back up to the top of this paragraph. I skipped over a sentence, and it's really important to put all this together. Once again, it says, the second chapter takes a unique approach to the character development in that it not only teaches about the impact of a family in the development of character, but it also informs students about the difference between a dysfunctional and a healthy family. This is an important distinction to teach our children, because so many children have been traumatized for so long, they are unaware of what normal, healthy families should consist of. Without this knowledge, they are more likely to repeat the same abuse to their children when they become parents. It is a known fact that many children who are abused become abusers themselves. So once again, I want to re-ask you the question. If someone abuses a child, does taking a person who abused the child and putting their face all over the newspaper, put it all over the local channel for everyone to see, make them register one time a year at the courthouse, give them a certain driver's license that anyone can tell, does that help fix the problem? If we want to go above and beyond to help children who are abused, we have to consider where the persons that were doing the abusing abused themselves. Why did they do that? What was broken in their life? And from that point, we can start fixing what goes on in society. but creating an atmosphere to where society very quickly wants to run out and lynch someone that does something wrong. And I'm not trying to say that it's not a detrimental thing in a child's life or anyone's life, and it's not a bad thing. But we should consider, why is it in society and why is it taking place? And we have to acknowledge that we've done nothing to stop it in society. It's worse today than what it was 10 years ago. 20 years ago, you didn't hear about human trafficking in West Texas. Today, you hear about it every day. It's a problem that keeps becoming worse and worse, and we have to acknowledge that we're not educating, because we've had generations go by to where these people that are abusing were once abused themselves. And that's just a fact that we have to acknowledge as a society and realize that the hurt we see and that the part in our heart that aches for that child should equally ache for the person that did the abuse. Something went wrong in their life just as much as just went wrong in that child's life. And the only way to fix it is to educate, not condemn. Now, other issues that will be covered in this chapter will be how positive and negative character traits are developed through family interaction. Once again, family interaction being very important in self-concept. What mutual respect is between children and parents, and the importance of mutual respect within a family. Practical approaches to improving the overall character of a family. And notice, you can put all families there. Unless you have a perfect family, you've got the only one. Families are challenging. We have to acknowledge that. Families have, we all have trials to get across. So we all have situations that we have to solve. That comes with the personalities and the character. It's important to realize that even though you may have 3 children from 2 parents, and everybody live in the same house, you can have 5 different opinions about one matter, 5 different personalities, and that's okay. But when it comes to the rules of the house that are set by the parents, those are what we're talking about must be adhered to, as long as these rules don't cause any harm to yourself, someone else, or the environment, the family atmosphere. These rules need to be adhered to. And we'll learn when we get into this, at a teenager's life, the greatest division you'll have between a parent and a teenager is trust. Is the trust that the parent's always wanting to protect the child, and the child's saying, hey, I'm growing up. I can do these things now. And the parent's just not trusting that, I just don't think you're aware enough. I don't think you're ready for it. And of course, the child wants to grow the wings and fly. And all of us that are adults now know what it was like to be that teenager who wanted to go do everything, but we didn't get to do everything we wanted to do. And we thought we knew a lot, and sometimes we might have known some things, but it's rare that you know more than your parents. And when you're older, you can look back and realize, I was wrong in a lot of places. The only problem is we couldn't say that when we were 14 or 15 years of age. We didn't have the experience and the knowledge that we have now to agree with our parents. And it's a very tough battle for a parent to try to say, all I'm trying to do is save you from hardship, hurt, pain, and even death. I'm just trying to help. And that can be a challenge because help isn't perceived that way from a teenager who wants to go out and do something. They want to go out and enjoy life. Mom and dad just wants me to not enjoy life. Well, as we get older, those things come into mind and they come into play into our lives. But getting that across, and what we'll cover in this chapter, is how we can do this in a way where mutual respect is given. And it's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do this. To be able to discuss with something that your child disagrees with you in, and to be able to come to a mutual agreement. To have something that you both can walk away with saying, we can build from this point. Sounds easy, but it's a challenge. Well, continuing on here, it says, it is the goal of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program to give each child an opportunity, notice an opportunity, and that's what we give, an opportunity to develop a positive moral character, and that's through shaping and molding. Children need to be taught that despite The challenges they'll face, the choice to be a person of integrity, belongs to them. And just to remind you, if you don't have page 18 written there, underline that word and write page 18, because that's where the definition is. And that integrity that it's talking about, of course, it's the internalization of positive character that's being displayed outwardly. And on page 18, here we have, it says, the end result of internalizing positive character traits that can be clearly seen in your actions and attitude is called integrity. And of course, that goes along with being steadfast. And steadfast would mean to adhere to an ethical code. In other words, if your parents give you instructions, be home by 9, you will do your best, unless some kind of car breaks down, tire blows out, you'll be home by 9. And in today's age, you'll make a phone call or a text to let them know if it's not going according to plan, if something has come up that's not working out. That's also a person of integrity, where if it's not going to work out the way it was agreed upon, you call and let them know a valid reason, not make up a story, but a valid reason where it can be worked out. You can imagine if you have a daughter who's supposed to be home by 9, her tire blows out. Most girls that are teenagers wouldn't know how to change a tire. I'm not saying all, but most. Most young men that are that age don't know how to change tires. You can imagine what a parent would be doing by 9:30 if they haven't heard from their child. And by the time the child walks home at 10 o'clock, the parent would be really upset, but it's more of scared to death that something occurred to the child, or we live in a dangerous society. And it's not that the parent is mad at the child, but it's more of a fear of what could have taken place with the child. And those are the things we have to be mindful of, is if we're upset and we're worried that danger or harm could have occurred to our child, just yelling and screaming at them and telling them how they didn't do it right, is that really the way to get the word across to them because we're upset that something could have occurred? Well, that's what the peaceful solution will help us do. It'll help us to express our emotions, our concerns with the child in a proper way, to where we can actually get across that we were concerned for you. That's why I'm a little upset. And we'll get into those things, explaining how even anger is not a bad thing. It just has to be managed in a proper way, and it has to be used to show that you might not agree with something, but it can't be used as an aggression to cause harm. So as we move forward, keep that also in mind as a parent. Of course, in these classes, you really don't know if you're going to teach parents or students, young men, young women. And that's where, when we go through this, we're going to kind of speak through it as you're talking to a parent or you're talking to a young man, young woman, because you don't know which you're going to get. And you would think that if you're sent a class from a governmental organization who governs children, that they would require mother, father, child to be in the class. Doesn't always work that way. You would think that, well, there's a family problem, we're going to go through this with the family. No, it doesn't always work that way. And this is why we have to be able to put this information in the minds of whoever we're teaching, to where they can be the example to the others. So continuing on here, notice it says it's our obligation as educators and role models to give our children the skills. Notice we have to give them the skills. And how do you give them the skills? You teach them. You educate them. Courage and determination to overcome any and all adversities for the sake, or for their sake, and for the sake of future generations. Now, looking over, once again, that was just to get our minds on the note to the teacher. That was to get the teacher's mind. And there's a lot of discussion. And I would encourage all of you do this. If you're going to class with other people that are training to teach, sit down and have discussions. We've learned through traveling thousands and thousands of miles and flying in many different countries, you can have a lot of conversation with fellow teachers that are training to do the same thing. And from experiences they've had in classrooms and with other students, you can get a lot of information from other people as far as examples, especially when you're dealing with different countries. Different countries have very different ways of dealing with things. But this moral code, remember, we said is pretty much universal. Everyone could agree with it. So interact with teachers and discuss. I'm not saying discuss personal problems that you've encountered in your students' lives. I'm not saying that. I'm saying presentation, how to present, and examples that can be given through studies or examples that can be given through, if you can give an example of a class you taught without giving away private information, that can be beneficial, like an example of a school. You wouldn't want to tell a student's personal story, but an example of a school would be acceptable. And keep that in mind as a teacher, that with this chapter, when you're teaching it, you're going to encounter private things. We've done it many times in schools where students will come tell us stuff and we're strangers to them, complete strangers to them. And they'll come say things to us that they should have told their guidance counselors a long time ago. But those words were never mentioned in their hearing, so they've never told anyone. But once these words are mentioned, they just needed someone they felt they can tell. Don't ever hear something and then you see something's wrong, go to the person that should deal with it, like a school guidance counselor if you're in a school, and tell them, and then you stay out of it. You've done your part as far as passing that information on. So guard these things very diligently, because remember, we're talking about how to build up a family and not tear down a family. Now in procedure 1, we'll go through, let's read the whole thing here. It says, lesson plan, the effects of character within the family, our purpose and objective. As the students will learn that a positive or negative character within the family directly affects their character. They will also be able to distinguish between a dysfunctional and a healthy family. And I want you to think about it here. Positive, negative character. Which one do you think families have? If you say both, you're right, because everyone has positive and negative. And what we're always trying to do, if you can imagine scales here, and this is positive, this is negative, we're always trying to raise the positive and alleviate the negative. We're always trying to make it more positive. And that's what we're doing, just like we do in our lives. We're trying to do that in the family life also. And we have to remember, it's not a quick thing. It doesn't take place overnight, and it won't take place overnight. The patience we have with ourselves, and sometimes we probably should give ourselves a boost because we're too patient with ourselves, we have to be that patient with our families. Our families are, if you're a parent, your family is only what you've molded it to be, what you've created it, the environment. Now, everybody gets to make choices, but remember what we said earlier, that a choice without education can only be made according to what they know. Now, if education's been put in the mind, then it becomes a rehearsal of reminding someone of something. But there's a little bit of dysfunctionality in every family, as we'll see, and there's a little bit of negativity in every family, and we have to acknowledge that. If we don't acknowledge that, we're not being realistic with ourselves. In procedure 1 here, it says to review the previous chapter by asking students to comment on the difference between character and personality. And the reason you're asking them to comment, you're trying to hear their words to see if they got the meaning and if they have the understanding of what was brought in chapter 1 concerning character and personality. And if you don't have it, you can write pages 13. That we've already read that. We read that a little while ago. It describes character. Pages 23 and 25. That covers the character and personality, the main topics of it, and that's really what you're looking for in your students. And we'll go over and turn back over to page 23. We've read page 13 earlier, but page 23, just to keep it in our minds, notice we had what is personality, and why are we asking it? Because it says here on page 23, because it's so easy to confuse personality and character, and it's important, or as we use the word paramount here in the second chapter, to explore what is meant by personality. And then, of course, we see here that personality is made up of behavioral traits that are unique to each individual. And in the family, like I said, you can have 5, 10, 12. You could have a lot of people in a family, and everybody can be different. You can have twins, and they be completely different in the food they like, and one can be shy, one can be outgoing, one can be energetic, one more laid back. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to the rules in the family, that's what we're looking for, the keeping of the rules in the family. But also looking over to page 25, this is where we read character versus personality, and we talked about that fine line. It said here on the top of page 25, or it says, it's important to distinguish between an appealing personality and a positive character. Keep in mind that personality is what we notice right away when we meet someone. It is how we present ourselves to others. In fact, if we meet someone who appeals to us after only one conversation, we think to ourselves, oh, he or she seems to be a nice person. And then notice character, on the other hand, is what helps you determine what is right and wrong. And character defines the way you treat yourself. Remember, we read about self-concept. That's very important as we move forward. And the way you treat others. Character defines the way you treat yourself. Important. That's where you start, is yourself, and the way you treat others. If you have someone that's being in a family, as a teacher, we have to be aware of this. If you have someone that's being disrespectful to others, verbally or physically abusive to others, you know you have to start with their self-concept first. They're not respecting themselves, and until they learn to respect themselves, they'll never learn to respect the family or the environment of that family. It becomes a battle for them. So this is what we want in their minds. This concept is what needs to be in their minds. And once again, you're asking them, and take your time. Don't force people to answer, but allow as many students that would like to answer to say something to get an idea of what they have understood the first chapter to mean. And then continuing on here on LP2C, back in Procedure 1, it says, ask students to share the dangers of forming friendships based solely upon compatible personalities. And you might be thinking, well, what does that have to do with the family? Well, remember that we read earlier that whenever a person decides they start disagreeing with their parents, it's usually because of the influence or other values from their friends. They see other things outside the family, and that starts to influence, as we'll get into, the mind, and it leads them in a different direction from what they've been taught originally. And that's something we can't escape. Children will go into society. They're going to make friends. That's a great thing, to make friends, but to make friends based on morality. So continuing on here with Procedure 2, now this is what we're required to do as a teacher. It says, inform students that today they will explore the difference between a dysfunctional and a healthy family. Please keep this in mind. If you have a group of 30 students, we rarely teach this. When we teach this in schools, it's usually a classroom. Rarely do you ever teach an auditorium about dysfunctional families. You've just got way too many people and way too many things going on to where you can't really control what's being said in a gymnasium. So when you teach this, you're teaching small classrooms. Because with this statement right here that you're going to teach them the difference between dysfunctional and healthy families, remember what we said, that we were even told by guidance counselors. When you go into a school, guaranteed you've got at least 5 students in that school that are being physically abused. And they never really gave us a number on verbal abuse, but I can imagine that being pretty high. And we're getting ready to poke some ribs, you could say, tickle people in a way they don't want to be tickled. You know, the way it's agitating. I don't want to, it's supposed to be funny, but it's not funny. It's needed, but I don't want it. Whenever you have, imagine ourselves. And obviously, I have a lot of people sitting out here in this class and a lot of people watching online, and I know nothing about any of your past lives. But we all have some bad memories. We all have some great memories. None of us just have all bad, and none of us just have all great memories. Well, some of us can have some really, really bad memories, like life-provoking memories that still affect us to this day. And when we go into a classroom and teach, you're going to have students with that same situation, but much younger. And they're not going to have the information that you've had by studying this program of how to deal with it. But you can have the empathy as a teacher And notice empathy, not sympathy. Empathy, to put yourself in their shoes to show them there's a better way. The challenge is you won't know which one it is. You won't have a clue until you start talking about certain things. And other teachers can tell you, when you get into certain parts of this chapter, you don't have to be a sophisticated person that's mastered in body language as you're teaching a classroom to know when you've hit certain topics that affect people. You'll see that on their face. And you have to learn to concentrate on the information that can help problems and not dwell off, because it's very easy when you mention something that you can see that child is being affected by it to off you go to talking about that. But we have to stick to the lesson plan. And if you ever see that, always go to the guidance counselor and just say, I noticed this. I don't want to say that this is the case, but this is what I noticed when I was teaching. A lot of times guidance counselors will tell you that, yeah, we're dealing with it. Because there's some horrific things that take place in children's lives. There's horrific things that take place in adults' lives. Adults are abused and battered just like children. There's sometimes the children abuse the adults, and that's just a fact in society. It's not, it shouldn't be done, but it's done. So continuing on here, it says in the second sentence of the second procedure, it says they will learn that both positive and negative experiences within the family are the foundation. Notice both positive and negative within the family are the foundation by which their character is formed. That's that form, shape, or development. And specific traits are developed. Now for that right there, if you don't have it written down, draw an arrow with that shaped and developed on page 4, because this is very important. This is almost as confusing as respect. Should it be earned or should it be freely given? This is another one that is really confusing. And what's confusing is where you hear teachers say some students are just hardwired to be bad people. Now think to yourself, is that a true statement? We covered that already. If you look back to page 4, there at the very bottom of the page, and the last paragraph, we'll read the whole paragraph. The information's in that paragraph. It says, both environment and what you have inherited are powerful tools to shape you into who you are. For example, if someone is born with the ability to be very intelligent or have great musical talent, and is never stimulated to learn or has no access to a musical instrument, he will never or she will never realize his or her potential in these areas. Notice your character is developed much the same way. The important or the paramount, the important point to remember though, is that your character and personality are not, underline the word not, fixed traits like your skin color or like your skin or eye color. No one is hardwired to be a bad person. People could possibly make bad decisions, and they could possibly be perceived as bad people, but they can change. No one is hardwired bad, and no one is hardwired to be a positive person. But you will hear that, and I'm amazed at how many people say that person's just hardwired to be bad. That's not true. Anybody, you can say that person was never educated or taught how to make a right decision. That would be more accurate in today's society. And if a person is taught and they still choose to make the wrong decision, that's their own choosing. But they're not hardwired. Anybody can change whenever they want to. So please keep that in mind. So going back to procedure 2 here, it says that we're going to guide class feedback by asking the following questions. How does interaction between parents and other family members help to form character? And that's something that we should ponder in our own mind. And if you take the time to, whether you were in a lot of us might have been in single parent families where it was just your mom or just your dad. Some of us may have grown up in foster care. We may have had guardians. And of course, we could have had the ideal mom and dad in the house that society offers, and that's what society kind of guides it toward, but that's not really what takes place with most families. It's not always that way. It's like having the mindset that everybody has new clothes, and everybody eats 3 meals a day, and everybody has a great life. We've been into schools in Laredo, Texas, to where everybody was dressed really well. And the guidance counselor was telling us, well, a lot of our students, they don't eat unless they're at school. And that kind of shocked me, because I'm thinking everybody's wearing like $100 shoes. Everybody's wearing nice clothes, but they valued that more than other things, or their parents valued that more than other things. And then if you've noticed during the times of COVID, in your own local communities, look at the schools and how they had to deal with the meals. When COVID first hit back in the spring, schools actually had to stay open to serve meals, not to educate, but to serve meals. And where we live here in Abilene, Texas, that was a huge problem, to where the schools had to set up an outdoor cafeteria to offer food to the thousands of students that did not get a meal unless they were at school. And that was an eye-opener for many, because many didn't know the problem was that bad. Well, these are things that we want to guide, and the reason I'm telling you these things, because when you say guide interaction between parents and other family members, you're going to hear a lot of negative stuff too. It's not always going to be the ideal, Leave It to Beaver family that you've seen back in the 50s. It's not going to be that way. Everybody has positive, everybody has negative. The other thing you have to be careful about is if you have a parent and a student, and if you're talking to the student, and the parent has told the student they can't do something, or their child they can't do something, they're in school, you ask a question, the student lashes out against their parent, how many other students do you think are in that classroom that's going to go, yeah, my dad too, or my mom too? They're just too hard on me. All I want to do is go to the beach, which is 500 miles away, with a friend that I just met yesterday. Well, that sounds crazy. Well, it's pretty common. You watch the news. It's always on the news. But you're going to guide this discussion. And notice here, it gives you some answers that can vary. It says parents are our first teachers, and that's because that's who teaches us how to walk and talk. That's who changes our diapers. That's who literally nurtures us so we can become who we are as a youth. So notice it says, so positive interaction with them will help us to teach the values and morals that help to develop the relationship with others. So once again, you're wanting to direct this in a positive way, but don't, when you're teaching a classroom, don't fool yourself into think, I'm just going to hear positive comments. You're going to be very quickly unprepared if you think you're going to hear a lot of negative comments. And you're going to find yourself not saying things that you want to say. You're going to find yourself hearing and then teaching, not hearing and commenting. Hearing and then teaching. You can tell a person they're wrong, or you can show a person they're wrong. The parents already told them they're wrong, and you're seeing the result of that. So now you get the opportunity to teach them that they're wrong. And it's not to prove, it's to save. It's not to hurt, it's to educate. So that's the discussion we'll have, and then we actually get into the lesson itself here with going to the introduction, and that's procedure 3. It says have students turn to page 35 through 37 in their handbook and read the introduction and the section entitled All in the Family. Then complete the following exercise. So go ahead and turn over to page 35. Page 35, and remember, this is the very first page in a student's handbook. Everything we've covered thus far is only for the teachers to be put into their mind, so that information has to be relayed over to the students. And the very top here, on page 35, it says character education, in this balloon here we put by the Peaceful Solution. It says character education is taught by the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program is a whole new way to socialize our children. And it's a way to, when we're talking about socializing, to educate them to be a benefit into society, to be a benefit to everyone that encounters them. To actually, people will want to, as we get into learning what it means to be a true friend, they'll learn to be true friends to other people from what the parents are educating them to do and to be. So here in chapter 2, the effects of the character within the family, the introduction, it says in the last chapter you learned that through the process of genetics, some of your behavioral traits are inherited from your parents. So some of them are inherited, but they're not fixed, like eye color or skin color. If your father had a very short fuse and a very bad temper, and your father would get upset and hit you, there's nothing that says you can't change that, and when you have a child, you can do it differently. The only thing that says you can't change that is you as an individual. And that's what we have to get across to our students, because you're going to hear from our experiences of teaching over 2 million students in the last 8 years, we've heard some pretty horrific things when it comes to this chapter. And you're going to find it's the most difficult one to teach when you're dealing with schools and groups. Because you're going to hear a lot of things where, well, my dad does this. Well, what are you going to do in your life? And then you got to keep in mind, you have a whole classroom here. Do you really want to have a personal discussion about personal problems in front of the whole classroom? So as you're teaching this, you'll find it's a very careful path you have to weave when teaching the classroom. So continuing on here, what we're reading to our students, it says, you also learned that your values, those are the things that we deem to be important, or what you consider as important, begin with what you have been taught. Notice what's been put into our minds. Once again, someone that hasn't been taught will not be able to do this. You have to be taught. The education has to be put within your mind. Or if these young people want to say, I want to have power, well, this knowledge, this power has to be given to you. If this power is not given to you, you just don't have the power. And then once you're given this knowledge, this education how to do it, the power is only there if you use it. If you don't use it, you still don't have the power. And that is something that a child has to realize. You have power. You have certain things you can do. And I don't mean fight back, hit your parents, or sue your parents. Or as we've seen in the news where a child wants to divorce their parents. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about fixing problems. Continuing on, it says, your parents and your environment, as well as other siblings and family members, play a major role in what you value and the development of your character. It has been stated that all forms of parental interaction, verbal, physical, or otherwise, assist in reinforcing children's values and behavior. So think about the interaction between a child and a parent. If the interaction verbally is always negative, how do you think, and this is for you to think about in your own mind, how do you think that would reinforce values in a child? It could go two different ways. A child could literally sit back and go, I don't ever want to treat someone the way I've been treated. Or they could say, as soon as I find someone I can do this way, I'm going to do them that way myself. And sometimes that's their release valve. They can't fight back at their mom or dad, so they go to school and they bully. And that's something to think about, because you'll find that bullying in schools usually starts with retaliation from what goes on at home. And the parent will go, well, little Jimmy, no way, my son's a bully. You know, when I take you home, I'm going to beat you half to death. Well, where did they get it from? Where did it start? Always remember, if little Jimmy or little Johnny or little Danny, whatever his name is a bully, he had to be taught to be a bully. He wasn't born knowing how to be a bully. These things have to be taught. And the lack of education can also be as detrimental. And then physical abuse, these all reinforce either positively or negatively in the values and behavior of a child. Now, here in the second paragraph, it says the role of parents and the family in shaping a positive or negative character, notice, cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated. In this chapter, you will learn that character plays a key role in families. Negative or positive character has the ability to destroy a family or strengthen a family within the unit. So this important aspect here can either help a family get through the hard times or help a family create more hard times than there really is. Things that really aren't that bad can be seen as the worst thing that's ever took place. It's kind of like when a child knocks a drink off the table and it spills on the floor. Could you imagine the parent that slaps the child and spanks the child, yells at the child, and the cup can be picked up, it can be washed, the floor can be wiped up? It really wasn't that bad. And if it was an accident, how much worse is it? And if the child picks up the cup and throws it at the parent, well, the parents should reevaluate, where did they learn that? And what can I do to teach them how to deal with that in a different way? Beating, yelling, and punishing a child that has not been educated to deal with it in a different way is completely unacceptable. And that is deceit, as we talked about with abuse. A parent can abuse a child by just not educating the child how to make a sound and proper decision. And that's just a fact, and that's probably the most common form of abuse. But once again, notice this cannot be overstated, as we've mentioned here, and that it has the ability to either destroy or to strengthen the family unit. Now, that's a great stopping point right there, because the next teacher, we're going to stop about a minute early, because the next teacher is going to get into All in the Family, and that really ties all in together with putting some points together we've covered thus far. So if you could put down in your notes, and this is something for you as teacher to put in your notes here, the last paragraph where it says the role of parents and the family in shaping a positive or negative character cannot be overstated. If you'll put a note to the side to read the preface of what the author said took place with his parents and the things they said. And if you remember, the author said, had these things not been mentioned in my presence, he would have made different decisions. But this helped form to what creating a program that is being taught literally all around the world that's led to that. And then we'll get into, you can put a note here. We're not there yet, but if you want to put a note to page 38, and at the very bottom where it says negative or positive character has the ability to destroy a family or strengthen it, you can put this note for a reference when you get there. Remember, on page 38, you'll learn that some parents become abusers themselves because they were abused. It's very important. And if you leave here tonight with nothing else, remember that when abuse takes place, there's two victims. Two victims. The one that did the abuse and the one that received the abuse, and they both need help, not just the one that was abused. Now, the next class we're going to have will be on 12/27, and once again, it'll be at 5:30 Central Standard Time. So once again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you back, and we'll continue with All in the Family. Thank you very much.